Hello, my name is Carl Surrey and this is a video tutorial for two Facebook groups, fans of Serif software and the Affinity Designer and Photo group. The name of this tutorial is Beginner's Look at Layer Types. It is an adaptation of a Photoshop tutorial I had on one of my photo magazine's free CDs. Although aimed at beginners, it may interest all users, although I don't just mean Affinity Photo users beginners, but beginners of photo editing in general. As you may have seen in other tutorials, layers are pretty much always used in any photo editing, mainly because it allows you to make alterations to images in a non-destructive way, meaning you will always keep your original image safe and unaltered, as the changes are being made on layers above and in some cases even below the original image. Now, as someone new to photo editing, you may be a bit bemused and a bit afraid of all the many options to be found in menus and panels of icons and don't know where to start. Hopefully this tutorial will help you simplify things. For this tutorial I will use a similar image to the one that was in the original Photoshop tutorial, an image of something splashing into some milk. I will add the link to this image, which I got from pixabay.com, in the description in the YouTube description area for the video. The tutorial will not look at every layer that you could possibly make, but at the actual types of layers that you can make. The Photoshop tutorial focuses on 3 main types of layers, but I do want to expand on that a bit to 6 types of layer. The 3 types mentioned in the Photoshop tutorial were adjustment layers, blank pixel layers, and duplicated pixel layers. But the 3 I will add to this are live filters, layer masks, and text layers. So, looking at this image that I have got from pixabay.com, what is it I want to alter? Well, the background is not particularly very as white as it could be, plus there is a vignette darkening around the edges here, which I would like to get rid of. And I want to add some extra splashes and maybe some text, and hopefully end up looking a bit more like this. So what I'll do is I'll go back to that image there, and we will then start the tutorial properly. Now, before we start to edit this image, I just want to go over how to add a layer to your project. There are a number of ways, and I just want to show you how to add layers before we actually use these layers. The first way is via the menus that run along the top of the screen up here, and we want the layer menu, and if you click on that, you have these various options where you can add new layers. You can add a new layer here, which is the new blank pixel layer. You can add a new adjustment layer, and then once you hover over that option, you can then come to this secondary menu to pick the adjustment that you want. You can also add the live filter layer. Again, the secondary option comes out that way. You can add a new layer mask, and you can duplicate a particular image or set of pixels this way. The only type of layer that you can't add using these menus is text. We will look at that later. Right, the second way of adding new layers is by keyboard shortcuts. If I again just go to this option here, and you can see down the side here, it gives you the keyboard shortcut that is linked to certain options. So you could either click on add a new layer, or you could use Control, Shift and N. Now this is on the PC. I believe Macs have Control and Shift, but if it needs the Alt key, like this one down here, which is Control, Alt, Shift and E, I think on the Mac the Alt is replaced with Option, but I can't swear to that. I really don't know for sure. But most shortcuts are done by just pressing the Control key and then a letter or number, like in the duplicate option, which is Control plus J. You can alter the shortcut keys if you go to the preferences and alter the shortcuts that way, and you can even make shortcuts for your favorite adjustments. Because like the new adjustment layer here, there are only 4 that come by default with their own keyboard shortcut. But if you use, say, vibrance quite a lot, you could go to the preferences and set up your own keyboard shortcut for vibrance. So that is the second way of making an adjustment or other type of layer. Now the other way is over here in this panel here. We got the layers tab, which is one you will have probably most of the time set up because you can see your different layers. And at the bottom here you have this little row of icons. Now the first one is add a layer mask. The second one, if you click on it, it will open up the various adjustment layers that you can start. You skip over the FX one. The next one is the live filters layer. Again, if you click on that, it gives you the list of live filters that are available. And the one in the middle of this group of 3 over here is add a new pixel layer. So that is the blank layer. So as you can see, you can add these layers, be they adjustments, blank pixel layers or duplicate pixel layers, in very many ways. Because again, you can also, on whatever layer is highlighted, if you right click on that, you can duplicate that from here, or add a new blank pixel layer. So that is another way that you can do these particular tasks. So now that you know the various ways to open different types of layers, you just need to find the one that suits you best. Some people will prefer to use the menu, some people prefer to use keyboard shortcuts, and others, generally, I prefer to use either the icons along the bottom here or right clicking the layer and choosing my options that way. But the only keyboard shortcut I use regularly is Control and J to duplicate, because it's one I can remember quite easily. So that is looking at how to open the layers that we are going to be talking about. Right, so let's start to edit this picture, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add an adjustment layer. Unless you've selected a particular area of an image, when you add an adjustment layer, it'll add the effect globally over the whole picture. So that is something to bear in mind. But if you have made a selection, say you selected this chocolate for example, and then added an adjustment, that adjustment would only affect the selected area. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a levels adjustment. Now for this one I'm going to come up to the menu option this time, come down to new adjustment layer and then levels, but I could have done Control and L, and then that'll open up this panel here, and as you can see it has added a second layer above the background layer. So I'm going to just alter this very slightly, and first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move the gamma slider to 0.8. In fact, it's easier to type this in, so 0.8, and that will sort of start to make the background a little bit whiter. Now if I clicked on merge now, this would merge this new layer into the background, and you could no longer make any more alterations, which is not what we want. So if I just click on this X to close the panel, that layer will be saved as a layer above the background, and if at any point I want to make more adjustments, I can just double click on the icon and it will bring back the options panel, which is why you sort of edit in layers rather than just sort of merging them in or what have you, because you always have the option to come back and make alterations if you so wish. So I'm going to add a second adjustment layer, but this time I'm going to do it from down here. I'm going to click on this icon and I'm going to come up to brightness and contrast. Now in this one I'm going to make the brightness 5 and I'm going to make the contrast 8. So again, this is going to brighten up this background quite a bit more, and then again I'll just click on the X, so I now have 3 different layers. Right, so moving on now to a blank pixel layer. Now I'm going to click on the icon down here, but as I did say, you could add it in from either the layer menu or by right clicking on this and coming to new pixel layer, or you can do Control Shift and N. But I will click on this icon here, add pixel layer, and as you can see it has added this layer here, but it has had no effect on the image because there are no pixels whatsoever on it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint on it. Now 9 times out of 10 you will probably use the brush tool and paint on a blank layer. I mean, you can add other things to it, but like gradients and what have you, but you will probably use the paintbrush tool more often than not. So I'm going to select the paintbrush tool from this tools menu down the side here, and by default I think it always goes back to black being the paint color, but you could paint in white. But what I want to do is to paint in a color that is from this particular image. So as you can see, the white, if I painted in white, it would be a bit too white for the background. So what I want is to sample part of this background, the brighter area anyway. And to do that, they've got this eyedropper icon up here. I would just click on that and drag it out, and you get this sort of magnified view of the area that the cursor is over. You just keep the finger held down on the left mouse button. So I'm going to pick a brighter, one of the brightest areas, and once I let go of the mouse button, that colour is now in this little white dot here. Now if I click on that little white dot, it will make this colour here the same as what's in there. So now if I paint on this layer, it will be nearer to this colour, because I'm over here, you can't see that now, but if I'm over here in the darker area, you can see that. So I'm going to make sure the hardness is set to 0. I'm just going to increase the brush size a bit using the square bracket keys, and I'm just going to paint around this area here. Try not to go too close to the chocolate bar, but yes, I think now do. So now we have a sort of pretty much same color white background across the whole image. Sometimes you can you may need to change the blending mode. At the moment it's set on normal. Sometimes it'd be overlay, or it might be multiply. It varies and depends on what effect you are trying to achieve, but I will leave that on normal like that. Okay, and if you wanted to see what you've done on that blank pixel layer, this background layer here has a little tick on it. If you click in this tick area to take the tick away, it will hide that layer, and you can see here this is the area I painted, and this is the area that has got no paint on it at all. So that is how that works. So now moving on to duplicated pixel layers. Now if I just duplicated, let me highlight this background layer. If I just duplicated that layer, it will duplicate the whole layer. Sometimes that is what you will want to do. It just transfers all the pixels from that layer onto a new layer. Sometimes you will do that if you want to change the blending mode of the second layer, just to help brighten something or darken something. But you can also select certain areas and add them as a duplicated pixel layer, which is what I'm going to do now. So you need to highlight the layer that you want to duplicate from. So in my case it is this background layer, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to change to the selection brush tool, or you can press W on the key to get to it, and I'm going to zoom in to the image, and I'm going to come up here and find some splashes that I like the look of. Let's try that one there. Lower the brush size down to about the size of the splashes that I want, and making sure that add is selected, not subtract. I'm going to just click on that particular splash there, and then I'm going to select that one. I like the look of this one here as well. So I'm just going to pick about 3 or 4. Let's try that one. Right, so I have 4 of these splashes selected. So now if I duplicate, and I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut, which is Control and J, it has added a new layer here that just has those 4 dots on. If I hide this layer, as you can see, it is just those 4 dots, or splashes I should say. So what I'll do is I will get rid of these selection areas. You can do that from coming up to the select menu and doing deselect, or you can use the keyboard shortcut of Control and D. So that has removed that selected area. I'm going to zoom out now, and the easiest way to do this is Control and 0. It will put your image back to the start position. And if I click on the Move tool, the Move tool will highlight these 4 pixels that are selected here. So I can now move those to anywhere I like on the screen, but obviously as I come up here they will be lost because they are under this painted area, which is the pixel at the layer at the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this layer up to the top of the stack. So to do that, I'm just going to left click on it, keep the button down, and drag it to the top of the stack. And then when I let go, that layer will now be at the top of the stack. And if I move this up here, it can now come over that painted area because it is above it. So I can resize this if I want to, and I can rotate it so it doesn't look quite the same, and add some extra splashes to the image. Now you could just click on that layer and rename it if you so desire. Renaming layers is a little bit helpful, so you keep track. If you have many layers, it is helpful if you rename them so you know which one is which when you come to sort of come back and edit it later. And you could then duplicate this again. This time I will just right click that layer and come to duplicate, and I can move that one out the way and sort of add a few extra splashes. There we go there. So that has added some extra splashes to the image that were never there using duplicated pixel layers. So that basically is where the original Photoshop tutorial ended, because it looked at the 3 different types of layers that you could make. So this next part will be extended version of that tutorial. So before I carry on, the first thing I want to do is I want to make a merged version of these layers here so I can demonstrate the other types of layers. Now to do that, what I'm going to do, I've highlighted the top layer and I will right click that and come to merge visible. Now you can also come up to the layer menu, and merge visible is available there, and like I said before, you can use Control Alt Shift and E for the keyboard shortcut, but I will use this version here, and I will click on that, and it will make a brand new layer that has all the information that is held down here. So technically, yeah, you could turn off all of these and it would have absolutely no effect to the image here, because all the information is now stored up there. I will leave them turned on though, just in case. If you make an error, you can always delete this and then come back and make alterations and then merge it again. I'm doing this because these next options, especially the live filter layers and the layer mask in particular, will work best if I am working on a single layer like this rather than sort of trying to adapt one of these layers, especially for this demonstration purposes anyway. So the first thing I want to look at is live filters. Now, filters by their definition on programs or in programs like Photoshop and many other photo editing programs are destructive options, in that once you use it you cannot go back and alter it. Now this is still true in Affinity Photo, because if you come up to the filters menu up here, you have all the different filters that are available, either from the main menu or from a sub menu. So for example, if I come to sharpen and come to clarify, by default I think it's set on 20 pixels, and if I click apply now, as you can see, it hasn't made a new layer or a child layer, which is what we are aiming for. If I click apply now, that effect has happened. I cannot go back and alter it unless I press Ctrl and Z to undo the last thing I did. And now this chocolate bar has sort of gone back to being slightly hazy. So if I just repeat that, filter, sharpen, clarify, hopefully you can see that chocolate bar has now come a bit more clearer and crisper. So I will cancel that. So we're now going to look at live filters. So like I said to you before, you can either do this from layers, new live filter, and then come down to clarify, or you can click on this icon here and then select whichever filter you want to use. So I'm going to use the clarify filter. Now as you can see now, it has added a new layer to that layer that I had before. If I click on this arrow here to make it point downwards, you can see that the clarify layer is a child of this layer above it. But because this is blue, this is the layer that is being worked on at the moment. Now by default this doesn't start off at 20, it starts off at 0. So I can move this up to 20 or wherever I want it, so it would work in the same way as using the more destructive filter. So again, like with adjustment filters, layers, you can click on merge, which would basically be what you would do if you use the filter option. So I'm not certain why they've made that as an option, but just clicking on the X to close down the panel will give you the option to come back later, double click on that to bring back the settings so you can alter it, much like the adjustment layers. Now the difference here, these adjustment layers, as you can see, hopefully you can see, it's got this little black and white circle on it, which means it is an adjustment, which is much like the icon for the adjustment layer, whereas the filter layer has this little two triangles icon, which is the same as the icon for the filters. So you know that that one is a filter and these are adjustments. So it's just a minor detail, but it just lets you know what type of layer you have added. So I think that is finishing the look at live filters, and now I'm going to move on to layer masks. Now layer masks have been covered in a previous video that I made, so I'm hopefully just going to sort of quickly go over the subject again now. Now the layer mask only has two functions. It will either show or hide pixels that you have added or adjustment effects that you have added, and they will come in two colors. You have a white layer mask or a black layer mask. The white layer mask will allow all the pixel or adjustments to be seen, whereas a black layer mask will hide all the pixels or adjustments effects. all adjustments and live filters will have a layer mask automatically added to them when they are made. So as you can see from this here, these levels and brightness adjustment has this white panel here, which means it has a white layer mask, and the clarity live filter also has a white panel saying it has a white layer mask. So these can be altered by painting black onto the highlighted area. So if I highlight this particular layer, got the brush tool and painted black onto it, I could hide the effects of the clarity filter. So I could, take the clarity away from some of these splashes, for example, or the glass rim, and just keep this area here a bit sharper than the rest of the image. But this isn't adding a layer mask extra layer to these layers, because it is already part of the adjustments or filters. So I want to look at adding a layer mask. Let me just close that down a bit. So what I'm going to do to demonstrate this is I'm going to add a new pixel layer, and to this pixel layer I'm going to add a black and white gradient. Now the gradient tool is this one here. You can just press G on the keyboard to get it, and from the options up here, it says none at the moment. I'm going to pick linear, and I'm going to just draw a gradient down the screen like that. And in fact I want to reverse that because I want it black at the top and white at the bottom, so there is a reverse button here. And what I'm going to do now is just edit the colours. So I'm just going to click on this box here. I'm going to leave the white node as it is, but I'm just going to edit this currently grey node, and I'll click on the colour option here, and I'll just pick black. So that is the gradient added, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the blend mode to multiply. So let me just come off that gradient tool to get rid of the line, which has just made the top darker, and it gets lighter as it goes down. So what I can do to this now is I can add the layer mask to it. Now, as I said before, this icon here is the add layer mask, so I'll click on that, and it has added as a child layer to that layer the layer mask, but it has added a white layer mask. Now a white layer mask will allow you all of the effect that I've added to be seen. So it has not made any difference whatsoever at the moment. But if I come to the brush tool and I make black as my foreground colour, and I will lower the brush size a bit. If I make sure that I am highlighting the mask and not the layer, if I paint now black onto that white layer mask, I can remove the effect that gradient is having, because I'm hiding the pixels. Now I'm not doing a particularly great job here because I'm coming over the edges slightly, but you can see what I mean by the fact that painting the black onto the white layer mask will hide the effect that those gradient pixels are having on the image. Now I could come back to white. If I paint white back onto the layer mask, it'll again bring back that gradient because it now will make that visible. So I can sort of tidy up the edges here. Again, I'm not doing a brilliant job here, but you could take your time when you do this yourself. So alternating between black and white will either hide pixels or show pixels. So that is the white layer mask and painting black on it. But you can, if I invert this and change it to a black layer mask, and you can do that either by pressing Ctrl and I, or if you come up to the layer option and select invert, it will make that layer mask into a black layer mask, and the area that I painted on would be now white. So it is, because the larger area is now black, it is hiding the gradient, and the gradient is now only having an effect on the area that is painted white. I hope that makes sense. It's just using black or white to either hide or show certain areas on a particular layer that it is attached to. Let me just delete this mask. Make sure that I'll click on the icon and I'll just delete that, bringing back that gradient layer. Now if you wanted to start with a black layer mask, you can only really do it by adding a white layer mask and then inverting it, or if you hold down the Alt key on a PC, and I'm guessing Option key on a Mac, and then click on this icon for the layer mask, it will make it a black layer mask from the beginning. So I could then paint white on the area that I want to bring the gradient back into. So really it depends on how much you want to hide or show as to which color layer mask you pick. If you just want to have an effect on a small area, start with a black layer mask and just paint on the small area. But if you want the effect to be on a larger area, have a white layer mask and then just paint black on the small areas you don't want that effect to be showing up into. I hope that makes sense. So that is the look at the layer mask being used as a child layer. I don't particularly want this on here, I just use this for demonstration purposes, so I will just put a click in there and remove the tick, so it will hide that whole gradient layer. I could delete it all, but I will leave it there. And moving on to the last layer type that I want to have a look at, which is text layers. Now, as far as I know, you cannot add a text layer from a menu or keyboard shortcut, because even if you come up to the text menu, it just gives you options for changing text that is already on screen. The text layers can be made via the text icon, tool icon, which is down here on the left, and which has got this big A. There's a little arrow next to it. You can either have artistic text or frame text. It doesn't matter which one you pick, the effect will be the same in regards to layers. If I click on the artistic text and I just click and drag out a letter, as you can see, it has already automatically added a text layer above whichever the current highlighted layer was. So I can then just start to type. And there you have the text layer made. So the only real way to make a text layer is via that icon there. If I wanted to, say, add a frame text and add some other text up here, for example, if I make a frame, as you can see, it has made a new layer automatically, and you can tell that one is an artistic text and the other one is frame text. So I could type in here something, but I will just insert filler text. I will just click on that and it will insert a load of gibberish. So that is really the end of this look at different layer types, be they adjustments or pixel layers or layer masks, text layers or what have you. I'm hoping this will be of some help to beginners of using Affinity Photo and or photo editing programs in general. All you would need to do now is to save your project. Now you can do this either two ways. If you go to Save As, it will save the file in an AF photo option. You just need to pick a name for it. That will save the whole file with all of the layers intact. So you could go away and then come back the next day and restart editing and adding new layers or what have you. If you have finished your project and you just want a single image, if you come down to export, you could then pick whichever file format you want. 9 times out of 10 it'll probably be a JPEG, but it could be a GIF, a TIFF, PNG or any of these other various options. So then you just click on export and then it will ask you where you want to save it, and I would advise changing the name of the file, like the previous one I did in my first run through. I changed it to the milk stroke and then all those numbers, and then I added the word edit. So I am not overwriting the original file that I got from Pixabay. So I've still got that image saved and I'm not overwriting it by the alterations that I have made. So if I wanted to, if I save this as it is now, or I changed it to that name, it would overwrite that file, and I don't want to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this version 2, just change the name slightly and then save it. So as you can see, that will save in either format. So that is the end of the video. Thank you for watching and goodbye.